This is Dim Simple Media, the first opposition common sense YouTube channel in Los Angeles. And today, instead of the usual complaining about all kinds of injustices against self-sufficient people and about various social issues, we're going to talk about something nice. And since we're outside of Netflix, you could guess that we're going to be talking about one of the major Netflix shows, which is the Stranger Things. Has become a cultural phenomenon in the past 10 years. As you can see, I put on a fan t-shirt for Stranger Things also for this special occasion. And today I want to actually express my personal appreciation to Duffer brothers who created Stranger Things and to all the famous actors that have been involved in this 10-year project, because Stranger Things show has deeply personally affected me from an unusual perspective. What is the unusual perspective is that I actually grew up in the Soviet Union in the 1980s. So the atmosphere of the 1980s felt very familiar as it was portrayed in the Netflix show, even though it was kind of familiar but with a major twist, which was, of course, my life in the Soviet Union and the Russian-speaking environment in the capital of what's now Ukraine, Kiev. So, of course, it kind of, for me, Stranger Things had a somewhat different impact, and I want to talk about the differences. But before I talk about the differences, I want to talk about what are the similarities between what was happening in Stranger Things and the themes of Stranger Things and what was happening in the Soviet Union in 1980s, which Stranger Things actually touched upon in great detail, especially when they were talking about the Russian labs that created monsters to get an edge fighting in a Cold War against the United States. So one of the themes that deeply affected me in the Stranger Things show was this sense of apocalyptic doom that the characters and the participants of the show felt at that time in the 1980s, because it was a Cold War. It was really a time of a Cold War when both Americans and the Russians thought that nuclear apocalypse was coming any minute. It could happen any minute. And I can testify to that as someone who was a teenager in the 1980s Soviet Union. In the 1980s Soviet Union, our media and the public opinion was really focused on this fragility of our existence due to the fact that our government in the Soviet Union spread this sense of impending doom that a madman in Washington could press a nuclear button at any moment and then the humanity would be completely wiped out. So we were taught to think that American government was a madman, that it was pretty much personified this madman like Vecna who wanted to destroy the world. And specifically they were talking about Star Wars and Reagan and things like that. And being an impressionable teenager along with others, I had no choice but to believe in all that. And so to us it was the United States that was basically Vecna. But I have to testify that actually we did feel this constant anxiety in the 80s as teenagers that the world could explode any moment and everybody could just die. What also moved me in Stranger Things atmosphere, or I guess when I was watching, what moved me was this safety for the teenagers that existed in that little town of Hawkins, where kids could just ride their bikes. There was this general sense of community, and it was conveyed in the show how people knew each other, and there was like a sense of community between them. When I lived in Kiev, Ukraine in the 1980s, there was also a very similar sense of community where even though it was a big city, people knew their neighbors, kids were playing outside without any fear of being kidnapped or attacked by someone, or being in an unsafe situation. There was a general sense of safety because they had at that time what is called a police state, so we didn't have a street crime. It was pretty much safe, just like it was in that little town of Hawkins. But the atmosphere itself was this really pleasant, peaceful, a safe environment for children to play and to grow and not to worry about weirdness that we are seeing today, and kids have to be basically behind the fence. Like all the schools are pretty much gated. A fence like this, I mean, come on, this was never the case in 1980s Soviet Union. It's probably not the case in some rural America, but like here in Los Angeles, schools need to be gated, and it's not clear if they're protecting the public from those kids or they're protecting the kids from the public. To summarize, the Stranger Things reminded me of this general sense of tranquility, peace, and confidence in your future, even though there was this nuclear Armageddon, impending nuclear Armageddon. But that wasn't the only thing we were thinking about. Our parents, our relatives, people around us, they instilled in us some sort of sense of security for the future. You knew exactly what you were going to do in so many years. You're going to go to university, then you're going to be guaranteed a job, a government job, because there was no other jobs there, just government jobs. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it created a sense of security, and that's what Stranger Things brought about to me, that recollection of that. Also, because I was growing up in the city of Kiev, Ukraine, the similarity between what happened in Stranger Things occurred in 1986 when Chernobyl exploded. This was really a watershed moment. It was a critical moment when this idyllic world was shattered. There was this idyllic, peaceful, tranquil world that we lived in, and all of a sudden, just like in Stranger Things, where this evil appeared out of nowhere, Chernobyl exploded. They were trying to evacuate hundreds of kids, thousands of kids from Kiev. The government would keep it top secret, would not allow people to talk about what happened. There was people fleeing in panic, but the government wanted to keep it secret, and people came out to the May Day demonstration not knowing that they were exposing themselves to radiation. There was also this invisible enemy around us, which was radiation. Actually, I was lucky enough not to live in Kiev at that time, but I visited Kiev for a couple of weeks in June 1986, and I remember how eerie silent the streets were, and how this imperceptible sense of invisible danger, which kind of brought about, this is what Stranger Things also reminded me about, this sense of horrible sense of invisible threat that is surrounding you. You don't know what's going to happen, and so this Chernobyl theme, even though it was never really touched upon directly in the show, it kind of reminded me of this change between this idyllic world and the sudden appearance of evil. And let's not forget about secret government labs. Of course, the entire idea that any government, doesn't matter whether it's United States government, Russian government, Chinese government, European governments, would not hesitate to sacrifice the lives of its citizens for quote-unquote a higher purpose, for so-called national security, and experiment with people. That theme also personally affected me when I watched Stranger Things, because Soviet Union in 1980s and before that was also known for all these secret labs where they were creating all kinds of viruses as a bioweapon, and I assume United States was doing the same thing. And the whole theme about governments being willing to sacrifice the lives of their citizens for some governmental goals, even in the name of national security or something noble, and that idea was on full display in Stranger Things, and it is very deep and it's very profound, and I'm glad that they brought it up. And of course, the most emotional theme of Stranger Things was this coming of age outcast teenagers that were, maybe not all of them, but most of them, they were not considered to be popular at school. Some of them, they were bullied, but they found each other, and they found this precious cause to fight for, to kind of organize around it, to band together for a noble cause and support each other and be there for each other. It's a very inspiring theme that I'm glad Duffer Brothers brought up. And for me, it's very personal because unfortunately I missed out on all that when I went to school. I was also an outcast. There was a lot of psychological bullying happening in my school. I changed 6 schools actually when I was a teenager, when I was little and when I was a teenager. But I could never find such a nice, fun group of friends to form friendship with and to be so excited about, you know, that they were helping each other, they were supporting each other, they were excited about common cause. And unfortunately I could never find that. I was always alone in that sense. And there you go, teenagers also passing by. Maybe they'll say hi on the camera. Hey. You wanna be on my YouTube channel? Go ahead. How timely! They're all passing by now, coming from school, and I'm sure they're having a good time there. They have good friends, hanging out together. Something that I missed out when I was a teenager, unfortunately. They came in really timely into the camera, so I'm glad they did. That was very nice. I want to thank Duffer Brothers and the great actors that were involved in the Netflix show Stranger Things for giving me back a part of my childhood that I never had, my teenage years that I never had. You gave it back to me in part when I was watching the show. You gave me back something that I missed out on when I went to school in 1980s Soviet Union. So I want to thank you for that. Since I'm outside of Netflix, on a more serious note, I do want to mention that even though Netflix is providing us with quality entertainment, and we are glad that we have this opportunity to watch quality shows on Netflix, I do need to say that if Netflix becomes a monopoly, if they buy Warner Brothers and they buy everything else, I feel that as consumers of the content, of their content and the movies and the shows, we're gonna actually lose out, as any consumers of monopolistic companies lose out, because they will be able to do whatever they want. Even now they can raise their fees, claiming that unions, the actors unions, extorted more concessions from them, and there's not much we can do. They're just raising their fees constantly, and if they become a monopoly, they're going to keep raising the fees, and then they're going to keep showing the content that they want, and there's going to be no alternative content that maybe some other providers can show, and that is concerning. We want to see alternative content that is coming from alternative sources, and we want to see some competition. So this merger, I don't think is going to be helpful for us as consumers. Is going to destroy our freedom as consumers. So we would like to express our opposition to buying Warner Brothers and becoming a monopoly. If you really enjoyed this video, let's keep it between ourselves. Don't worry about liking it, subscribing for it, sharing with anybody. I don't care. I actually don't want you to spill the beans.